Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the His and Her Life Hacks podcast with Larry and Dawne. Today, we're going to do things a little bit differently. Back in episode 4, if you remember, we had Dawne tell her story, and we received a lot of heartfelt responses back, questions back about that episode. And so what we thought we would do is we would re-record that session here today. And for those of you who have not heard it, you'll get a high-level overview. Dawne will take you through that. But in particular, she's going to talk in more detail about some of the areas of those questions. And the first one that really came up was a lot of questions about your childhood, and in particular, your relationship with your parents, because unfortunately, I think that was something that others have experienced who are watching it.
Yes.
So why don't you start there?
Yeah. And so thank you, everybody, for your feedback, your questions. It warms my heart and saddens me all at the same time that anybody has experienced anything like I share or worse. Some of your stories actually were worse than mine, and I'm so sorry for that. But just high level, as I shared on the previous video, I was born to parents who did not want me. I was unplanned, unwanted, unloved, hated, literally, and told every single day of my life. Unfortunate, yes, but it really shaped, my life as a child, and carried some of those things throughout my adulthood. I was labeled a black sheep of the family, the bad girl, the problem child, and all of that. When yet I was really a good girl. I was a good child. I was a pleaser. I was always searching for love. So I was mislabeled, but those labels carried with me into my adulthood, which left me really lacking confidence and strength and belief in myself and all of that. So wasn't a fun childhood, but and I guess that really then, so when you're rejected by your parents, but then if I were to separate it, when you're rejected by your mother, that creates a mother wound, and then it was compounded by my father. So I really was dealing with two wounds as a child into my adulthood.
So you had mentioned too back on the first episode, or the first time we did it, that your mom had portrayed publicly a very strong faith in God. You guys were raised Catholic, yet behind closed doors, like when the church doors closed and the eyes weren't on her, it was a much different experience with her. And I think, don't you talk us through that too, because I think that that influenced how you looked at things and could trust things when you were young, and what was real and what wasn't.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so yes, my mother, growing up, I would say I didn't really know any terms. I just had heard the term two-faced or bipolar. And I didn't know what that really meant. I was just like, all I could say is like 1 minute she was Jekyll and 1 minute she was Hyde. I don't even think I knew that term. I think I probably just said 1 minute she's mean and the next minute she's acting like she's a saint in front of other people. But yeah, specifically, we were raised Catholic. And so my idea of God and faith was through her, because my dad was Lutheran. And his mother was very, very spiritual, a very church-going, giving, loving servant of God through her Lutheran community. So I kind of learned a lot from her, just what God was and spirituality and all of that. But, the bulk of it came from my mother being the Catholic, and she, would take us to every Holy Day and Ash Wednesday, and but the whole way to church, as an example, she would be criticizing and mean and nasty and angry and talking bad about people, or just angry, just raging. And then we'd get to church and she would be like, "Hi, oh my gosh, how are you?" And acting like this holy Catholic. So in my mind as a young child, it was that bait and switch, constantly what was that? Because she wasn't that just 5 minutes ago. So that it wasn't just in her religion. That was really what I lived in on a daily basis. And so to the world, she presented as this wonderful, sweet, kind, giving woman, and who loved her children and all of that. But it was the furthest from the truth. So,
well, and you yourself talked about being a people pleaser, you wanted that love. Here you were sitting or walking around in your house on eggshells, just looking for some love, some attention, and yet, and then going out and trying to please in order to get that, but you never got it back. How was that? And again, how did that form how you then evolved and your character and your behavior.
Yeah, I mean, so my idea of love is what was represented in my home. So love equaled abuse. So as a young teenager, then I was looking for love, and I was looking in all the wrong places because I didn't know. But that really translated into some younger, relationships that I had had in my teens, where I was attracted to these boys who, seemed, I guess, a little rough around the edges, but actually would act really sweet and nice. So that kind of lined up with what I was, raised with. And to me, this was my normal. This was, oh, okay, yeah, he's just like my mom, and that's, I guess, good or right. So then I would have these relationships where they would act very nice in the beginning, and then all of a sudden they would change, or they would have, like, one of my relationships, he used to drink all the time, and he became a different person when he was drinking, but then, and like would be abusive and stuff. And then the next day he would come to me crying and being like, I'm so sorry, like my father did this to me, and I know it was wrong or whatever. And so those things really mess with my head, because when you're an empath or a pleaser, or someone just always wanting to give love, receive love, like all about love, you then switch. Like, you almost say, okay, my feelings don't matter. Like, what you did to me yesterday doesn't matter, because now I feel really bad for you that you're crying because you feel bad about hurting me yesterday. So now, instead of me, thinking about myself, I'm consoling him. Just like I would, with my mother. If she was like 1 minute angry and the next minute nice, then I would be like, okay, I forgive you. Yeah. But really, like, if I had the confidence that, I would say most children, but I don't know about most children, but if I had had the confidence as a young adult or a child, I would have never stood for that kind of life, with any boy or anything. So really, the wounds that you learn from your parents, they travel with you, and you don't know any better. You're just unconsciously living that life and repeating patterns. And that's really what I did in these younger relationships. So,
well, and then you had a very significant traumatic event, and it was born out of, again, another scenario where it was a love-hate scenario with your mom, a situation with your mom. So why don't you talk about that and how that then impacted and put you on a different trajectory, really, for the rest of your life?
Yeah. So when I, again, hated my mother because she hated me and tortured me, but yet always craving her love. So one day in particular, we were in the kitchen. I was sitting there eating breakfast. It was just me, and she was behind me, at the kitchen counter, cleaning up or whatever. And she had said, hey, do you want to go shopping today? And I actually, I had to pause and look around and see who else was in the room, because it sure couldn't have been me that she was talking to. I mean, that's, how I felt. So I said, me? And she was like, yeah, you. Like, no one else is here. And I was, confused. But then this tells you how 1 minute, I'm hating her. I don't want any parts of her. And then the other minute I'm forgiving her. And I'm like, yeah, sure, great. So because she asked me that, I was like, yeah, absolutely. I'd love to go shopping. So I go upstairs. I go to get ready. And within 5 minutes, she's charging up the steps, raging about something. And when I say rage, I mean rage. It's not just angry or whatever. I mean, she went from 0 to 100. So she was, climbing up the stairs, raging about something, which I couldn't hear her. She came into my room and started yelling at me about something about me leaving crumbs on the counter, how irresponsible it was of me or whatever. Meanwhile, I hadn't even created those crumbs, so I didn't know what she was talking about. But, and so with that, she grabbed me by my hair. Now I'm 17 years old at this point. So, I mean, it's never okay to put your hands on your child, in that vicious way. But now I'm 17. Could you imagine grabbing your daughter at 17 years old? And, so she pulled me by my hair, as to say, get downstairs and go clean those crumbs. And while she was doing that, she was dragging me to the steps by my hair and then threw me down the flight of stairs. And at that time, I remember the stucco wall, the popcorn wall. So it never leaves my mind. I remember that wall forever, because I bounced down the steps, hitting it, and then landed on the landing, only to have my father come running and say, Dawne, what the hell did you do to piss your mother off? And in that moment, I am what the hell? Seriously, 1 minute we're shopping, next minute she's raging about crumbs that I didn't do, and then she's throwing me down a flight of stairs, and now my father is saying I was to blame, and I am in shock, not to mention bleeding and the whole 9 yards. So in that moment, I was like, I am done. I am out of here. This place is crazy. I cannot stay here anymore. So I left and then never came back.
Yeah. So back to your question, can you imagine somebody grabbing a 17-year-old by their hair that way? No, I have a 17-year-old, and there's probably those of you out there who have a 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old girl. Like, I can't imagine ever doing that. And then I certainly can't imagine what you're about to explain and the choices you had to make and what your life became. And if I look at my daughter, and Faith is my 17-year-old daughter, and imagine her having to live that way, it's something, I can't imagine that. So now this happened, and what do you go do?
Yeah, so, excuse me. So when I say I left, obviously I didn't have a plan. I didn't know what I was doing, where I was going. I just knew I had to get out of there. So I had a lot of good friends. So I went to my one girlfriend's house, and, I was all cut up and crying and shaking, like didn't know what happened. I explained to her. Now, this was not new for my girlfriends to hear this. They were used to me having these stories or crying attacks or panic attacks. I mean, I lived as a stressed out child, So, and the mothers of my friends also were used to hearing this. So, again, my girlfriend took me in, cleaned me up. Her mom, of course, is like feeding me, and she's dressing me in her clothes and, telling me, you're going to stay here. Like, we're going to make a plan. We're going to figure this out. You're going to stay here. Well, I also didn't want to be a burden. So, there's the part of me that's like the child in me that wants to be nurtured through what just happened. The adult in me that had to happen early on was like, no, I don't want to bother you. Like, I'll figure this out. So I went to work quickly with my friends in brainstorming. Like, what can I do? Like, at this point, I am a senior in high school. So, or just starting that year. So I'm trying to figure out, like, can I get a job to pay to find an apartment? But I don't know anyone at this age who wants to live on their own. So my girlfriend found a friend who was older than me, who was already working, and she was looking for a roommate, ironically. So that allowed me, so we connected, we met, and I was like, okay, this will be fine. So I then got a job in the restaurant industry on top of I was working at an insurance agency after school every day. So I was working 3 to 5 after school. And then I went right to this local bar restaurant that I was a cocktail waitress. And I worked from Wednesday through Saturday from whenever I got there, like 5:30, 6 o'clock at night until 2 in the morning. Because at the time, bars and restaurants were open until that. And thank God I made, incredible money, because at the time, like bars, you would make a lot of money. And so that somehow provided for me the ability to live on my own, finish high school, pay the bills. Here I am adulting as a young child, but I did it. I mean, I was in survival mode.
So you should have been, planning what you're going to wear for homecoming or the prom or, what's the theme of the Friday night football game? Here you are working full time pretty much to fund your living, and then trying to also figure out, well, how do I do my schoolwork to actually pass the grade so I can graduate? So that's a mind-boggling thing to comprehend.
Yeah, and I mean, college, I did envision going to college, because in school they have those college counselors who come in and they talk about, like, well, what do you want to be? And ironically, I wanted to be a lawyer. And so you think about that. And I remember saying I want to be a defense attorney. And I knew nothing about that. I just knew, obviously, like inside me, I was probably like, I want to fight. I want to fight for people, because people like myself. But so I remember, when I was going through that before this incident happened at home, I remember coming home and saying to my parents, I think I want to be an attorney. And I remember my mother laughing at me. Anytime in my childhood, like when I was in chorus and I was singing, she was like, oh my God, will you please shut the hell up? Like, she was always saying things like that. So, like, again, talk about cutting down on your confidence, So fast forward, always wanted to do that. Didn't happen. College didn't happen. I just went right into work. I started keeping really busy, A, because I had to, but B, because, that's all I knew. So started working in the restaurant industry full time, more in like management and doing a bunch of other stuff. I actually met my future husband in the restaurant industry. I felt like I was on a good trajectory. I was surviving. I was paying the bills. I was living on my own. It seemed like it was working. I knew no different. So in my mind, I'm like, okay, this is good. Met him. We went on to have 2 beautiful daughters who are my joy, my everything. Unfortunately, our marriage it was unstable and it didn't last. We stayed in it for 18 years, but and then we dissolved our marriage and then I just moved on. And from there, I again rebuilt and just thought, okay, I have a new start. I got a new job. I had met some new friends. I was starting kind of to feel good again, like, okay, I'm on a good path again. And then
yeah. This is where the other questions were coming in.
Yes. And then I was introduced to who I call Prince Charming.
Yeah.
And I say that facetiously because, again, once again, if I had known now known then what I know now, life would have played out very differently. There's a lot of regret and shame that I carry for that. But as a life coach, I always say, we do the best with what we have. And I have to keep reminding myself of that. But so this Prince Charming showed up in my life. He was introduced to me by a friend at the place of work that I was at. And, I definitely was not looking for a relationship. I mean, I had just gotten out of my marriage and, we were just trying to figure out co-parenting and like making sure the girls were good. And that was not a priority of getting into a relationship. I liked how like we were being introduced by a friend. Like I thought, oh, that's nice. I wasn't looking, but so there was something intriguing about him. But it wasn't like, I couldn't put my finger on it, but he felt like home to me. And now again, if I knew then what I know today, that is actually a red flag that I should have known. Because that red flag would have represented what he represented, which was actually a replica of my mother. So when I say there was familiarity and this comfort and like he felt like home and I was intrigued, it was really my childhood playing out again. It was, it wasn't where I thought I was going to go with where I was in my life, but yeah.
Yeah. So then, so warning signs for the people who are listening in, like some of the things that were showing up that you said, now are red flags. Were there any particular details to...
Yeah, I have a lot of red flags. That's like a whole book or chapter.
Well, it is actually a book.
I am writing a book on it. But yeah, this was also one of the questions that we received on our videos, or on the video. So red flags of an unhealthy relationship that feel comfortable. So if you come from a background like me and you've never kind of worked through it, which I hadn't at that time, I was literally just surviving. I didn't know, like, they show up as Prince Charming, but then they flip, right? So that was just like my mother. 1 minute she's nice, the next minute she's not. So that's a red flag. 2 weeks into the relationship, he was mad that I was going to a work event. And he was showing signs of control, rage, and jealousy. So those 3 things, if your child is going through any of that with a boyfriend, or if you as a woman are having that, get out. Get out now. It doesn't get better. I promise you it doesn't get better. But what happened was he did exactly what my mother did to me. So he raged at me for this event. He made me not go to this event. And when I say that, he literally made me not go to this event. And then after he got what he wanted, the next thing I got from him was tears. And he had tears in his eyes. And he was saying, I feel so bad that you missed your work event. It's all my fault. Like, I feel such like a bad person because I'm not healed from my past relationship where my ex-wife did X, Y, and Z to me, which was all a lie, I'm sure, anyway. But in the moment, as the empath and the person that believes everything that everybody tells her, I was like, oh my gosh, like I don't matter, because again, this is my childhood repeating itself. I don't matter. If you're happy, I'm happy. And now it's my job to make you feel better about being so mean and nasty to me and making me miss my work event because you're crying. So when somebody cries, I'm like, oh, you know. So these are all red flags, you know, that don't change, and you need to get away.
And I think, you know, we've now talked about in one of the episodes the origin story and the childhood wounds that happen typically before you're 18 or 20, but then form that blueprint that you've already mentioned, and subconsciously is in your mind and impacts how you view the world, how you view relationships, how you make decisions. So when Prince Charming showed up, you know, it kind of brought you all back to that same spot, and it was normal to you, even though it wasn't healthy. It was what you knew. It followed the blueprint.
Yeah.
And so, but that was the catalyst for change for you.
Yeah, for sure. I was 37, 38 when I met him. And I stayed in that relationship, unfortunately, for 8 years. And he literally chipped away at me. So when I said a little bit ago that I was starting new, I was, you know, new job, new path, new friends, everything seemed like it was great. These kind of people actually target people who have everything going for them. So he slowly chipped away at me and brought me down to a shell of a person. Like, I didn't even know who I was. I don't even think I could have formed a sentence at my 8th year. There was a defining moment where I knew I had to leave. And it was kind of very similar to my mother throwing me down the flight of stairs. And so one would say I stay too long and that it takes something major to get me to leave. And that is because I'm loyal. And so, by the way, people, loyalty is a good quality to have. It's just you need to know who to give that to. So yes, there was a moment, an incident where I decided to leave. And he literally brought me to my knees. I mean, just think I'm repeating my childhood. So now I'm at the age of 47 or 46. And I feel like still, all these years later, I am still living in pure hell. So I needed to understand it all. And so I threw myself into therapy, heavy, intense therapy. I also, faith, you know, as I mentioned earlier, it was not a big part of my life. I thought that God put me on this earth to torture me. And the representation of God was through my mother, which was evil. So again, I don't have anything good to say at this point. But my girlfriend, who I love for doing this and just love in general, she brought me to church. It was a Lutheran church too, by the way. So I feel like my grandmom had her hand in that. But she kept hounding me in a loving way to go to church, while I was going through this whole chaos of breaking the 8-year relationship. And I kept saying no. And then I eventually went. And so when I was doing the work and I threw myself into therapy, I threw myself heavy into my faith. And I had a conversation with my pastor, and I was like, look, I don't understand my life. I don't know why, you know, people that are supposed to love me or claim to love me, you know, not all the people, but a good portion of the people in my life, you know, abuse me. And so at that point, I was questioning God and like, why am I here? And she went on to say, you know, she said a lot of nice things, but the one thing that stood out was, you know, perhaps God is bringing you through this for a reason and for a greater purpose to help others. And so that really changed how I thought about things, because honestly, you have a choice. Why am I being dealt these cards? Now, I'm not speaking about every situation in life, because unfortunately, like, people are given, you know, horrible, you know, sicknesses and stuff. And I'm not saying that is like, oh, you're meant to have that. You know, I'm just saying in my situation and others out there, if you go through something like I've described, perhaps if you change the way you're looking at it, you know, it's a different perspective. Maybe you're meant to go through that so that you can help people, because if you've never gone through it, you honestly can't talk about it. So, yeah. Yeah,
it really becomes the gift, right, that you're given. As horrible as that was, and as much as you wouldn't wish that on anybody else, because you went through it, because you lived it, and then because you recognized it, did the work, put your faith in God, back in God, and He led you through that, that then becomes a gift for you to give to others, which is partly what you're doing today, right? Giving the gift back to those who are listening. It's also what you've been doing in coaching and writing and so forth. So Yeah, it's hard to recognize that in the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I always say to Larry and to everyone, I'm like, I hate my story. I hate telling my story. Like, I get angry about having to do it. But I'm building a business about sharing my story. And it's not my story, it's how I overcame it that I want to share with the world, because my heart goes out to anybody who's experienced this. And it's through, I decided to become a life coach because I added a life coach to my therapy regimen when I was going through my healing. And so the life coach really was able to get me forward. The therapist was helpful in her time, but I needed more. And so the life coach then was giving me small achievable goals that I could move forward with. And I love life coaching so much, I became one. I studied for it and wanted to help so many. Started writing a book, and then Larry and I have met and came together, and we were on the same mission, ironically, and we wanted to make a business out of it. We knew that we were both put here for a reason with different stories, but it was meant to help each other or help others. And so we have a company called Grit to Grace. We have a podcast, this one, Life Hacks. And so we're just trying to help others with what we've gone through, and hopefully today's deeper dive, I guess, in some of those areas is helpful to you guys.
Yeah, and I think, you're all, and you talk about this a lot, and this is really the theme of what our business is built around. We are here to help you transform your pain, and your pain may be different, how you came upon it, how you experienced it, but it's still a pain that's inside of you, to transform that pain to ultimately into your purpose. And your purpose has become taking that gift that you had through those experiences and using that to help others, right? And that truly is living out your purpose. And we believe, right, that God, through bringing you to your knees in the time that he did, bringing me to my knees in the time that he did, really at the same time, taking us through a process, we are now given these gifts, again, that we would never ask for, nor wish on anybody else, but they are gifts, and then we're using them to transform others' pain into purpose. And I know you hate telling the story, right? And unfortunately in our business, you're asked to do it a lot. But it's a beautiful story of overcoming. It's a beautiful story of triumph. It's a testament to your strength, to your resolve, to ultimately then your faith and being open to your faith in God. Because you could have completely shut God out for the rest of your life, and that would have been understandable, but you didn't. You walked back into that church that day, and you listened and you were open. And now we go to church on Sundays. We're back in the Catholic Church,
but it's my terms, right?
Yeah.
And I see God in a different light. I don't see him being shoved down my throat by somebody who was acting like a hypocrite and mixed messages and everything. It's on my terms, and I'm very faithful, and I live that way every single day of my life.
So thank you again for sharing it, having to do it twice. But we felt like, again, some of your questions were really good, and we wanted to Dawn wanted to go into more detail in certain areas of it that I think will be helpful to you. So we appreciate you again listening in. And it's an example.
Feel free to write back to us. I mean, I do love that. I love hearing from you. So
yeah, this is an example, a perfect example of you giving us feedback and us thinking it through and saying, okay, let's tell the story in a way that might help in other way and help further help people. So thank you again for your attention. We appreciate it. We look forward to talking to you in the next one.
See ya.
Take care. Thank you for listening in to this episode of the His and Her Life Hacks podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. We look forward to having you join us on future episodes. If there is a topic that you would like Dawn and I to discuss, please feel free to contact us at dawn.jacoby@grit2grace.com or larry.ambrose@grit2grace.com. See you on the next one.